Hey guys, and welcome to the Finance Now podcast. This podcast is purely for informational and educational purposes, and it's my way of sharing my knowledge, research, and opinions with you. I'm Anurag Birla, and we are back after almost half a year. I needed some time off due to, academic pressures, workload of just joining this new master's program, and obviously recruiting for internships over the coming summer for 2024. So I've been pretty busy with all of that, and I've just needed some time to adjust and settle in. But I feel like I'm a lot more settled in now. I'm a lot more ready. So I did want to get back into doing this, and obviously a lot has happened in the markets. We've entered a new year after a pretty shocking 2023, and I mean shocking in a positive way. I think at the start of the year there was 100% prediction of a recession happening, if I'm not wrong, and if we do go by what was predicted and what the markets did last year, it was obviously anything but. The so-called Magnificent Seven had an incredible year, and thankfully so did my portfolio. Given that so much has gone on, it's a bit difficult to do a sort of wrap of everything we've kind of missed out. So I'm really just going to pick up, from where things are currently in the markets, and as we're fully into earnings season, I'm just going to pick a few stocks that I follow and I've been tracking or own, and just kind of dive into those. So the first one I wanted to start off with was Netflix. Now Netflix has been absolutely incredible since the start of the year. Shares climbed over 10% that day after reporting strong Q4 earnings. Now revenue beat consensus estimates, hitting $8.83 billion versus what was predicted as $8.71 billion for the quarter. They showed a 12.5% increase in revenue compared to last year, and this was obviously positive signs from their password crackdown initiative that they launched last year, the inclusion and expedition of their ad tier, and also recent price hikes and adjustments on certain subscription plans as well. So obviously all these initiatives that they've taken are coming into fruition, and it's trickled down to the bottom line as well. I mean, earnings per share also beat estimates, coming in at $4.49 a share versus what was estimated as $4.09 a share. The stock, close of this week is currently trading at about $570 a share. Now that's an incredibly high valuation. And I think, based on some of my research, the general sentiment is that while subscriber growth may still occur going forward, the rate at which it happened in 2023 will not be repeated in 2024. So that speed at which subscriber growth occurred is going to subside and slow down in 2024. Intuitively, that makes sense. A lot of the catalysts that cause this acceleration and this growth in subscriber numbers may not just be as effective as the year goes on. I mean, I think Netflix have managed to squeeze out probably the most that they possibly can with this password crackdown initiative. I mean, these are initiatives that tend to have a lot more traction early on and then kind of trickle down in how effective they become, because they've just exhausted the pool of their target demographic. Now, because of this general sentiment and because of this outlook, I think some analysts and banks are skeptical, and I'd like to single out Deutsche Bank as being very skeptical of Netflix. And they believe, or they're of the school of thought that all the good news for Netflix is priced in, and for them there's nowhere to go in which they can subscribe, in which they can surprise investors or show some sort of beat in earnings. And this is where I fundamentally disagree. I think in an industry like this where content is king, Netflix have done incredibly well in being innovative and creative in the type of content that they release. And I say this after this week that Netflix they secured the WWE Raw deal, which, a bit about the deal, it was a 10-year deal worth reportedly more than $5 billion. Now, what this partnership will do is it's going to bring WWE Raw, which is WWE's flagship program, onto Netflix's streaming platform beginning Jan 2025 for the next 10 years. Now, going back to that question that, many people would ask, where will Netflix's growth come from? I think this is it. This is Netflix's first big venture, or their first big bet into live sports streaming, which is great. It's a market that's sort of untapped. It's sort of still belonging to cable and broadband. So this is Netflix's acceleration into that space. And given that WWE is such a story-based form of sports/entertainment, I mean, people can argue what it categorizes under. It just complements Netflix's business incredibly well, in the sense that it's going to give Netflix the ability to produce more content around the storyline, around the general, scripts and sentiments of what's happening in the story across the year for WWE. This is sort of what they've done with sports like tennis and Formula One, with Breakpoint and Drive to Survive. They've created this almost sports documentary niche that we see on Netflix now. And if you look at what WWE Raw is currently doing, they're bringing in 17.5 million unique viewers per year, which is a big enough number to help propel more growth in Netflix's subscriber count, especially if there's not much overlap between, the 17.5 million viewers of WWE and Netflix's current subscriber base. WWE is owned by TKO Holdings, which also owns UFC. Now, I don't want to get ahead of where things are at the moment, but, I just cannot help but wonder, is this going to be a story for the future? In the sense that, yes, right now WWE Raw is scripted, it's pretty much a form of entertainment, not necessarily competitive sports, but is this Netflix's step into and segue into more live stream sports? Are they going to expand their demographic, and are they going to, bid for rights for the UFC or for, any other sport? And what this means for Netflix, in my opinion, is if they can lead through content creation, new content would lead to new subscribers. With new content also comes more ads, and more ads, along with more subscribers, means more revenue and better profits for Netflix if they can remain operationally efficient the way they have been as a company over the last year. Right now, in an industry that's been struggling so much, streaming has been struggling so much, all I can say is that Netflix have been firing on all cylinders. There is a clear expectation and sentiment for them to move into live sports, and honestly, given their current offering, it just works content-wise. From my perspective, I think this could even trickle into parts of their gaming segment. I mean, they own a fair number of games, and that's not something that people are super aware of. But if they do decide that they want to grow and create this ecosystem where the games can link into the content that they're posting, as well as, some of the live stream sports that they're posting, I feel like the ceiling is a lot higher than we think for them. And it's an exciting company to watch. It's obviously an exciting time for them, and they're just building off of their lead against some of the other streaming players. Now that brings me to another streaming service that I wanted to talk about, or another entertainment/media company that I wanted to talk about, which was Comcast. Comcast also reported earnings this last week, and they were strong. I mean, their quarterly revenue topped estimates, rising 2.3% to $31.25 billion compared to what was estimated to be $30.51 billion. Now, their earnings can be taken as mixed news in some sense. I mean, they lost broadband customers. However, the surprise was that they only lost 34,000 compared to what was predicted to be 61,000. It's still exceeding the 18,000 that they lost the last quarter, so that number is growing, just not growing as fast as, I guess, analysts would have predicted. I don't think this comes as a huge surprise, simply because we know that a lot of people are moving away from broadband and they're moving towards streaming. And I think that has been, an industry trend that we have been seeing. So to some extent, this isn't much of a surprise to anyone who's been following this company or this space. But if you look at the positives, you tend to see several growth drivers in the way Comcast has reported their earnings. I mean, revenue of their streaming service Peacock rose more than 50%. It rose 56.5% from last year to hit over $1 billion for the quarter. For the first time ever, it surpassed $1 billion. To be exact, it hit $1.03 billion for the quarter. Now, their paid subscribers also increased by 3 million to 31 million. Peacock deployed, obviously, a strong strategy, I think, this last year. I mean, they streamed the NFL playoff game between the Kansas City Chiefs and Miami Dolphins, which, subsequently became the most streamed event in U.S. history. That was a big move, and I think that's showing that sports is also ready to move on to streaming platforms. The consumer is ready to accept sports on streaming platforms. And, I think that's kind of why, going back to Netflix and their strategy, I think it all fits into where streaming as an industry is heading. Their Comcast content and experiences segment also reported a 5.7% increase in revenue, up to $11.5 billion. Now, this includes NBCUniversal. As a production studio, NBCUniversal have had an immense year. I mean, they've had major hits from Oppenheimer to Super Mario Brothers, the movie. And these titles propelled them to the top spot in terms of worldwide box office. Now, this is the first time since 2015 that Disney as a company is not on top. And it's a surprise. NBCUniversal, I mean, given the mess that Disney are going through, maybe it's not as much of a surprise, but the fact that NBCUniversal have knocked it out of the park with certain titles does come as a surprise. And, alongside that, the revenue from their theme parks business also rose 12.2% to $2.37 billion, with attendance globally increasing. I think that's, in Japan and in the States. The fact that their theme parks business is doing better despite macroeconomic conditions perhaps not favoring the consumer as much does come as a surprise to me, and it's very impressive. I think when you compare the way Comcast is being run to the way Disney has performed over the last few quarters, you can see a clear discrepancy in the standards, in the level, and in the maturity of the company within their streaming life cycle. I would say for Comcast, overall, just a really solid quarter. They also raised their dividend, and they just look in good shape for the coming year of 2024 as well. Moving away from streaming a bit, I wanted to talk about, obviously, a company I love and I've spoken about many times, Tesla. Sadly, Tesla has been a bit of a disappointment in recent times. I mean, shares of Tesla fell 12%, wiping out almost $80 billion in market cap. Now, this was the single worst day of trading in almost 2 years, and the stock price fell to its lowest close since 2022. Overall, I think if you look at the start that Tesla has had to 2024 as a stock, it's been incredibly poor. And the earnings call pretty much sums it up. I mean, it was a dull, very downbeat call in the sense that sentiment for sales growth was pretty bearish. And despite an increase of 38% in deliveries last year compared to 2022, they still fell short of their annual target of 50%. Now, previous quarter results were disappointing to say the least. Revenue only increased by 3%, which was far below expectations, and adjusted earnings per share was down 40% from a year ago. Now, obviously, price cuts have a lot to do with it. This is the second consecutive quarter for Tesla in which earnings were a disappointment. So this is what I mean by they just haven't been doing well as a company recently, and they've definitely taken a beating in the market as well. And by disappointment, I mean this is the second consecutive quarter where earnings fell short of forecasts by analysts. Now, Tesla's operating profit almost halved to 8.2%. Yes, this is not a surprise because we know that Tesla were cutting prices, trying to gain more traction and trying to gain more volume versus more profitability. But this drop is huge, and I think the reason for this was it was driven primarily by their Cybertruck production costs. For this particular call, something that an analyst at Wedbush, Dan Ives, he tracks Tesla a lot, talks about Tesla a lot. He's a big Tesla bull. But something that he pointed out, which really struck a nerve with me, was that nothing about that earnings call from Tesla's leadership gave any sort of assurance to shareholders in any way. And I completely agree, and it irks me to a bit. There was no strategic direction provided on how Tesla are going to handle increased competition by Chinese companies. There was no strategic direction provided on what they're going to do with price cuts, their margin shrinkage, and how they're going to deal with fluctuating demand as well. And I say, of course, increased competition exists. I mean, Chinese EV manufacturers have picked up their game, and namely BYD. I mean, BYD became the world's leading EV manufacturer last quarter, selling more cars than Tesla. And, honestly, given this entire industry and sectoral picture, I feel like in this situation, Elon Musk told shareholders exactly what they wouldn't want to hear. What he said was something to the extent of Chinese car companies will demolish most other car companies in the world, if not for trade barriers. Now, to openly concede such a statement like that is shocking. It doesn't fill a shareholder with, a lot of confidence in Tesla as a company. And it's just not a good look. It's just not a good look for Tesla's leadership. It doesn't say much about their belief in Tesla as a company as well. But I will say this increase in competition with Chinese EV manufacturers has sparked some, anti-dumping investigations by European regulators. And, dumping refers to the sale of products at a much lower cost than what it was produced for in foreign countries. And European regulators exploring this could lead to higher import tariffs in countries in Europe on cars coming from China, which could help if Elon Musk decides to stay price competitive. But I'm not too sure on relying on these sort of regulations and trade barriers imposed in order to show, elevation and a strong thesis against the market average or the industry average. Now, during research, I also read somewhere that Cathie Wood and ARK Invest has loaded up on Tesla shares. If I'm not wrong, it was $32 million worth of Tesla shares after the 12% drop. And I'm not going to lie, I did add to my position too. But that's not too much because of how I think the earnings call went. I think you can chalk that up to just Elon Musk being Elon Musk and, him kind of having that I don't care attitude. And, it's more his personality I think you could chalk it up to. But I added to my position simply because there are still a couple of catalysts that I believe could work in favor of Tesla down the road. And the first one I say is, their low cost vehicle that they're developing. I mean, this has been in the works for a while. They've spoken about it. There has been news about it. Now, the launch for such a product within the next few years could obviously ignite more traction that Tesla as a company and shareholders are looking for at the moment. I think maybe not so much by shareholders, but definitely by Tesla and Tesla's leadership. They expected Cybertruck to have that traction and generate, some of that interest from multiple consumers, but I just don't think that has been the case. I mean, it obviously has not been the case, but I think with this low-cost vehicle, if they enter markets such as India, if they enter markets such as Indonesia, these things this is what could separate them from some of their competitors. Owning a Tesla at a cost-efficient price for the consumer is exactly what they need, and I think that's going to help them in their competition against Chinese EVs, definitely going down the line, and also in terms of adding more traction and sales to their name. The second catalyst that I believe could work in favor of them is the lowering of interest rates and the hopefully improving macroeconomic environment. Now, this will help the average consumer in terms of affordability and spending power. Many consumers tend to buy cars through auto financing, and obviously lower interest rates would make that entire auto financing process cheaper. It would make their loans cheaper, it would make their payback cheaper. And, that could be something that could also work in favor of Tesla going forward. And hopefully these are things that could surprise the market in some of their consequent earnings calls. But, I'm not going to hold on to hope for this year. I think the guidance and outlook for this year was pretty glum. I think the price is probably not going to move too much this year, but hopefully we'd be ready for a much, much better 2025. I know it's just the start of the year and I don't want to look too far, but Tesla is definitely, for me, a long-term play, not one that I'm willing to get out of right now, because I think there's a lot of value that this company offers the world. And even though, leadership may be very up and down, to say the least, I think they've proven that they're able to generate and produce an incredible product, and they're very technologically driven, which is also why I believe in the company, and I also believe in Elon Musk. But I do believe he has to focus more on Tesla as a company and perhaps not some of the other things he gets up to once in a while. But I think that's part of his nature, and Tesla for me is not something I'm going to be getting rid of anytime soon. Now that wraps up the earnings rundown for this episode. Hopefully, as I said earlier, I can get into a more consistent routine now that I'm a semester in. I'm more settled into Singapore, but I cannot promise that. Workload keeps changing, but I will do my best. That's something I can definitely promise. And if you did make it this far in the episode, I thank you for listening. Once again, I'm really happy to be back doing this. I'm Anwar Birla, and this is the Finance Now podcast.